Welcome to the show, everyone. Today's guest is Adrienne Green. Adrienne learned early in her finance job and later as a high school math teacher that she didn't enjoy being stuck inside, tied to an office, a classroom, or a desk. Adrienne got her start in real estate without any mentors or family influences by house hacking in her basement. As she began to invest in other real estate, she began to understand the struggles of being a solopreneur in real estate. She was doing everything alone, managing tenants, handling maintenance calls, and tracking expenses. Her portfolio depended entirely on her, leaving no time to focus on growth. Without systems, scaling only created more stress. Every new property just meant more work. She was driven to transform her portfolio by running it more like a business. Adrienne began creating streamlined systems, hiring a virtual team, and automating key operations, turning her hands-on, time-consuming portfolio into a scalable, profitable business. Now, as a high-energy speaker and coach, she helps other real estate investors do the same so they can scale their portfolio without working 24/7. I'm excited to have Adrienne on the show today to share how she's scaled her business and now travels the world with her family in a relentless pursuit of her dreams. And with that, Adrienne Green, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Thrilled to have you here. And as we were chatting before hitting record, you are very far away from where I'm sitting right now in the Far East in Osaka, Japan, right? Which is, I guess, about 14 hours ahead of the central time zone in Texas where I'm sitting today.
Yes, I am. It's exciting. I've been in Asia for about 4 months now, traveling full time with my family. We had never been to Asia before, and we just planned a good 5 months here and jumped into it, and it's been amazing.
The life that you have created is so intriguing to me, and I'm truly inspired and a bit awestruck by it, because you have the thought of picking up your family, or in the case, if I think about it in my terms, picking up my family and moving to not only just like, hey, we're just going to travel, but going somewhere so far and so different than what I've grown up in by going to Japan or to Asia is incredible. And you've got kids and you got school thing to figure out, which we'll talk all about, all these components and taking that leap and what it took for you to do that. It's really awesome.
Thank you.
But you didn't start there. So let's talk about where you started. So what was it like? Where did you grow up? And what was your family life like? And what were some of your early influences?
Right. So I grew up, I think, in a pretty typical or average, American upbringing. We moved around a little bit because my dad was in sales manager. So he'd, work in sales in one location and then they'd, transfer him to another district or region and things like that. So, my major influences growing up were starting in Southern California in Orange County area, and then in elementary school moving to Washington State for a few years before Atlanta. So I kind of got three of the
Oh,
four
wow.
corners of the U.S. covered, and then I went back to Southern California to go to University of Southern California for college. So I was a little all over geographically, and those cultural geographic influences, and yet very domestic, right? And very traditional W-2 kind of mentality upbringing. My parents worked for other companies. There was nothing entrepreneurial in there, no real estate investing in there. Very much we're working for someone else. That's what we do. We get up in the morning, we go to those jobs. And, for me growing up, an exciting vacation was when we did a road trip up the coast from Southern California and went as far as Vancouver, Washington, right? So I think I have departed a lot from how I was, or maybe let's say built upon and expanded from
Yeah.
how I was brought up. And I think I had a solid foundation in a lot of ways, and that's allowed me to do these things, which has been really exciting, I think.
Yeah, it's incredible. So you mentioned so your parents were W-2 employees. And so the messaging or the influence was go to, go to school, go to college, do well in school, and then get a good job and find that steady place of employment. What were your,
Mhm.
what was your sort of school life like as you headed toward college? Did you have plans for, okay, this is what I'm going to get my degree in and what I'm going to go do for a living? Or was it more you didn't know? What was that? What did that look like?
Well, I was always really great at school, right? And so I was great in a lot of different areas of school. My teachers liked me. I'm very good at following rules and
Mm.
working within that school system. And so I decided to go to college and I wanted to study business, right? Such a specific passion, but that's what I wanted to do. And so I went to University of Southern California. I wanted to be in like, LA or New York, this big city, and all, I had these, I think, teenage ideas of going there and studying business and having these connections. And now in college, at University of Southern California, they have a lot of areas you can focus in or concentrations that you can partner with business or things like that. And I think the evidence of I wasn't quite sure what I enjoyed or what I wanted to do is that I hopped between these different concentrations. I started with a focus in cinema and television, right? Because I had
Yeah.
done some of that in high school and thought I liked it. And then I got there and I was like, this is not my world at that level of being in LA. That is not what I envisioned it to be.
Right.
And so then I think I switched to international relations and loved those courses. But then I switched and ultimately ended up graduating with my focus or concentration being in finance. My sister is a financial planner. She helps people invest their money. And so that was my, I think, influence. And so I did that, wanting to do it more on the corporate side. But then I worked in corporate for, an asset manager and finance and just I felt like a hamster on a wheel being in a desk all day, in this building with these windows that didn't open for 40 plus hours a week. And, I worked with some great people and there's some people who really thrive in that environment, but I found just being at the computer so much and not getting to see the difference I was making was really challenging for me, not just feeling like I was checking boxes all day wasn't something that was very motivational for me.
Yeah, that's interesting. What I'm curious, when you came out of school, did you like know, okay, I'm going to go look to get employed by one of these certain employers, or was it more like, hey, I'm gonna get my resume out there and see what I can find in the world of kind of finance, or what did that look like for you? Do you remember how that? Because what I'm getting to there is when you have that moment of and now you've got that job, right? So you've come through 4 years of school, you've worked hard, you kind of tried different things, but now here you go and you get that first job. Was it like, yes, I've scored that job, or were you kind of like, I don't know, is this what I wanted it to be, or was it an initial excitement? Trying to get the vibe on that.
Right. It was exciting. A lot of great businesses came and recruited from USC. And so there
Yeah,
was a lot of opportunity there. I mean, I remember for one of the job interviews being flown up from Southern California to the Bay Area. That wasn't the company I went with, but it was really exciting to be like, okay, they're flying me up for the day to do interviews, right? And I
yeah,
got an offer from there, but ended up getting an offer in LA and wanting to stay in LA. But yeah, it was a big thing and it was stressing. I mean, I remember that last semester of college, that spring semester prior to graduation, all the stress of applying for jobs and wanting that. I remember not being able to sleep because I was so stressed out. And that was one of the first times that I'd experienced that because like just
yeah,
wanting something and wanting that next step to be ready and set. So it was like a huge achievement to get these offers, to feel like I knew where I was going to be, that I wasn't going to be jobless after
yeah.
college. Because another, I guess, part of my story that would be relevant here, Eric, is I actually went to USC on an honors program where I skipped my senior year of high school and started college a year early. Now,
Mm,
I was also already young for my age, so that meant when I started college, I was 16 and I turned 17 October of my freshman year of college. So I have been pretty independent from a pretty early age. I really, since going to college, never went back and lived with my mother or my father again. Like I spent summers maybe at my sister's house or staying at college and like renting a place there over the summer. So yes, I was graduating college at 20 and hadn't lived back home since I had started college. And it was like, yeah, I need that next step. I need a place to go. Like I'm not the kind of person who just goes back and lives in the parents' basement for the summer and finds something, or
right.
that wasn't me. So.
Right. Man. And so, all right. So you get that job in LA and you're making at this point, you feel like, oh man, this is like good money. I'm making adult money. I'm out of school. I'm curious, did you work when you were in college? Did you have any kind of like college jobs or?
Oh yeah. I mean, I've been working, I think, since I was 15. So in high school and then in college. And so yeah, it felt great to have what felt like, an adult job and
Yeah.
adult income and all of that for sure. And so I appreciated all of that. And I think I really enjoyed it for the first, I don't know, maybe 3 to 6 months. But then it was just
Oh,
like
not long.
I
That's
re
3 to 6. I thought you
no.
said like years, but no, it's like 3 to 6 months. And then what happened? The bloom starts
Well,
coming off the rose.
yes, I kept that job. I left after about a year. I left after about a year. I was like, I'm gonna do a year. And I ultimately left to my first venture into kind of like that you don't need to have that there's other ways. There's other ways other than that W-2 job. So I
Mm,
ended up I was, when I was like, this is not for me, right? I applied for other W-2 jobs and was like, okay, what maybe gives me more satisfaction of like making a difference, right? I remember applying for a job back at the university that I had
mm,
graduated from, being like, maybe here I can feel more impactful, right? Like I'm making people's lives better. But ultimately, what I ended up doing was getting a SAT tutoring job because I had done well in the SAT and I applied for it. It was a good hourly rate, of course, like those can be. And I ended up being like, okay, this is a bridge. If I get this SAT tutoring job, it allows me to quit this W-2 job that I feel like is a little soul sucking.
mm.
And so I did that and I ended up starting my own business while I was doing the SAT tutoring. I got married at that time. And so it was a transition of being like, you don't have to go be at an 8 to 5
Mm.
W-2 job. Like there's other ways to make things work. That was my first little taste of it. I think it took it longer for that to really sink in. But that was my start of there's other things out there.
Interesting, man. So, all right. So you leave the finance job. You're doing the SAT tutoring thing. You mentioned you started another business in concert with the SAT tutoring. What was
Y-
that?
Yes, and it was never successful, to be honest. And yet, I think that we started those lessons learned that can be
Yeah.
so big on the entrepreneurial journey. But it was a custom children's books. So I designed these children's books where you could customize like the child, if it was a boy or girl, if there was one or two, kind of what they looked like. And then you could
Mm.
customize the parents as well. So you could have one or two, and you could again customize boy or male or female and what they look like. So it could be like you could have a single mom with kids or a single
Right.
dad with kids or a grandma who was raising their kids, and
Right.
you could put in the family members' names as well. So it was this idea. I had no experience. I mean, I wasn't especially artistic. I think I designed the first one and then I got like a college student to do the second. But it was this idea that didn't honestly play to my strengths. That was one of the lessons learned. But it was a great opportunity to start to learn what does it look like to have your own business? What goes into that? And what are all the pieces?
Yeah. It's so awesome. I mean, what's coming out is that you clearly have this, that entrepreneurial spirit. Whether it certainly, it doesn't sound like it was, you had the influence of the parents around you that were giving you that, but it was innate. So the idea of like, oh, I'm gonna have one job, and I'm gonna get a second job, and it's gonna be, well, not a second job, but a second venture, which is gonna be, I'm going to hire some people. Like you mentioned, I'll hire a college kid to do some design. Like that alone, I think would be so foreign to most people, myself included, be like, well, I'm just going to figure out the tools to use so that I can do the design. But you were like, I tried one, not the greatest at it. I'll hire somebody to do it. So that entrepreneurial spirit of piecing things together is, I think, pretty unique.
Well, it definitely came, and I think for me, um, one of the underlying traits or things I've learned, strategies I've learned is to focus on if something isn't great, what are the lessons learned, right? If we have
Mm,
something that flops or isn't what we expected it to be, what are the lessons learned and how can we level up, right? And this has been something I've learned over time. It's not natural, I don't think, but the idea of, failing forward and it's like, okay, if this isn't really like, if I'm not, this is the best it can be, how can we get it there?
mm.
And working to have no ego in that, right? And working to be really logical in that choice and very pragmatic.
Yeah. The other for sure, and what's also kind of a takeaway here for me as I'm thinking of your story is um, you mentioned earlier that you were really good at school. Like you said, I think even like I'm a good rule follower, right? I could figure out the school rules and then I would perform to those. That's also tends to be very opposite of entrepreneurialism, which is, very much there are no rules and you have to figure stuff out.
Right.
It's a blank sheet of paper every day and you have to figure it out every day. So the two talents almost are opposed to one another. If you're really good at following rules, you tend to be maybe less good at white sheets of paper, and people that are entrepreneurial tend to have done like poorly in school, right? They tend to be like, man, I was the
Right.
one always getting in trouble because I never would follow the rules and the teachers hated me for it. And yet you've done both at a high level, right? Good student and now obviously successful entrepreneur. It's a very unique blend, especially I've
Mhm.
interviewed so many entrepreneurs and they generally, again, they're like, they tell a similar story about, I was just always in trouble and never a rule follower, couldn't sit still, versus, or someone else who might say, I was, if they had a great corporate job, which I have many guests and clients in that space too. And it was like, yeah, I don't deal well in that white space. And yet you did
Right.
both, which you've done both. It's incredible.
Well, and what has helped me in that entrepreneurial world, because yes, I don't think, I think there are other entrepreneurs who are much better with that white space, right? Much better at that creativity and creating something from nothing. What's helped me a lot is the idea of like rip off and duplicate, right? In the
Mm,
real estate space, that's what our R&D is, right? And it's not in a theft manner at all, right? But for me, if I can see someone else who is that next step or a few steps ahead of me in this space, that gives me the framework that I can then follow. So that's been really helpful for me along the ways where I feel, and it's helped me get further faster when I feel like I'm not quite sure or I'm floundering. And so for me, that could be, how do we find or where do we look for those people who are a few steps ahead? Of course, at the most basic level, it's listening to podcasts like this, right, Eric? Like podcasts have been huge,
hmm
YouTube, books. And then personally, not to jump ahead too much, when I was a real estate agent, I started at I didn't know, I mean, everybody knows real estate agents, but I didn't have any close friends or mentors who were real estate agents. And I just kind of started with a local brokerage that it was okay. But then I ended up switching to a big national brokerage where once I met somebody through networking who was based on, she's like, you need to come here because it has those people who are ahead. It has that path you can follow. And my business really took off once I switched and was in a world where it was like there were people ahead of me and there was a clear system of here are resources, here's our ways, here's a tried and true method that you can use to get ahead. So that's what I'd say. That's what's worked for me as somebody who likes to have frameworks to work within.
Right on. Love that. So let's move forward then in the story. So you go from the tutoring job, SAT tutoring, you try the book business that doesn't go as well. And so what leads you to the classroom? Because you end up going back into the classroom and as a math teacher and teaching school,
Yes.
which when I think of is like, oh my gosh, pay cut time, right? Because if you went from a finance job where you're making good money to maybe some entrepreneurial things where you're again good hourly rate, maybe if you can get enough hours and that you're making again a good living. And now the classroom, my head goes to how do you make that work, right?
Right. Well, so I decided to get into teaching because again, I realized that the challenge I had in that finance job was feeling like I wasn't making an impact, right?
Mm,
And so I was like, okay, where are some places where I could, be impactful? And I thought about different ones and also, lifestyle, because that's something I think, especially young people don't think about. What is that work-life balance that you want? I know work-life balance is kind of a joke, but it's like, what do you want that to look like, right?
yeah.
Do you want to be in that finance? I mean, mine wasn't 80 hours a week, but a lot of them are. Do you want a finance job that's 80 or 100 hours a week, or do you want something that is it's where you've got more free time or whatever that is. And so that was part of it going into teaching, but mostly it was that I'd love to help people and wanted to feel like I was really making that difference. So I went back and got my uh, teaching credential. In the state of California. You need a separate teaching credential, and I didn't have those courses, even with my bachelor's in business. And so the nice thing is, the tutoring and having my own business gave me that schedule flexibility to go back and spend that time to get my teaching credential. Now, and so then I, started teaching high school math, and as part of the pay issue, the nice thing is in Southern California at that time, and I think still to this day, teachers are well compensated. It varies so much by region, by
Yeah.
state. And so I was fortunate to be in an area where teachers did make great money. And then, you know, after I finished my teaching credential in student teaching, my husband and I actually we wanted to get out of Southern California because for various reasons. Southern California is very expensive. It's very crowded.
Yeah.
And we didn't feel like it was a place where we would have the lives we wanted to have as, a family. And it wasn't necessarily where I wanted to raise kids or anything like that. And
Yeah.
so we transferred, or he transferred with his business to this company to Northern Virginia outside of DC. And that was another area where teachers are, it's one of the higher paid areas for teachers
Okay.
in the nation. So I was fortunate to be in a couple of areas with great school districts and great teacher pay. But yeah, so as I finished teaching, we moved up there and I started teaching in Northern Virginia. I was able to get connected and work at a school right near the house we had bought there. And so, for a few years, that was a pretty good setup.
Gotcha. So you're in the classroom and enjoying that experience, even though what I was hearing earlier is, you want to feel like you're making a difference in people's lives and you're influencing. Obviously, when you're facing off with youth, you're having a chance to impact lives, right? So that
Mhm.
chord is being struck, and yet you're in the classroom probably for long parts of the day, obviously, the class day or the school day. So that maybe is a little bit of dissonance there around, no, this, I like influencing
Yes.
people, but I'm stuck in this room and I'm going to be to this desk forever, as however long I'm choosing this profession. And so when does that sort of
Mhm.
start to rear its head as like, I don't know if this is going to work.
Right. Well, it was really easy when I lived like a 5-minute drive away, right? When I lived close enough that I could sometimes like walk or bike to work and home. So then it was easy, And then we moved to another house that was kind of like we thought our dream home. It had acreage. We wanted to like have a huge garden and all
Mm,
this. And so that was about half an hour away from the school. And and then in the afternoon, if I hit traffic bad, that became 45 minutes. And there have been studies about how really once you pass that 30-minute drive time for a commute, that
mm,
starts to impact your quality of life, right? And I totally felt it. So that was pretty was one of the major tipping points. And then, my husband and I started talking about we wanted to have our own family. And I was realizing kind of like looking, like you were saying further down, like the years ahead. And I was like, okay, well, I would have to put my little baby that I want to have, right? I'm going to have someone else be with them all day so I can go be with these other people's kids all day. Like, is that really what I want to do?
mm.
And it was a no.
Yeah.
That was a no,
Yeah.
pretty clearly,
Yeah.
for me. And I realized there, to put it in I think bigger picture values terms, Eric, is that I realized in looking back, when I had issues with the finance job, and now what was starting to be a pain point with this teaching work was that I really value like time and location freedom. I love to work. I love to like do the work. The challenge is I like to do it with some time and location freedom, right? I
Mm,
don't want to feel like like you were kind of saying, like at this desk all day, every day where I don't get to control it, right? Where
yeah.
I'm having to, well, you get a lot of time off. If someone's listening and they're like, Brian goes, oh my gosh, as a teacher, you get so much time off. You know, you get the time off when it's the most expensive time to travel, right?
Mm,
It's the
and the
most
most
expensive, it's the
crowded.
most crowded.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I remember while I was teaching in that public school, my husband and I went to St. Martin for spring break. And so we go to the airport early on Saturday morning, right? Because school was through Friday. And as teachers, like at least at the district I was at, it's really pretty strict about not taking the days off before these holidays because
Yeah.
otherwise all the teachers would
Everybody
do
would
it.
do it.
And yes, and so were kind of strict about it. So like Saturday morning, we go to and we lived pretty close to an airport at that point, close to the Dulles airport, maybe like 15 minutes away. We get there very early and there are lines literally out the door, right? To check in. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm afraid we're gonna miss our flight, even though,
Yeah.
rule follower that I am, we were super early and I was still like, I've never seen lines legitimately out the door. And so yes, there were just some friction points like that with the fact is you can tell since I travel full time, I love to travel. It was busy and crowded during the school holidays. And I was like, let's see how we can pivot this again. And that's where I started. Again, I was like, what can just make that difference? What can help make that difference between my salary that I have and how can I make that up while I figure out stuff? And so that was where I started real estate investing by renting out my basement. I was like, hey, this helps make some of that income. And then I also started teaching online again, kind of going back to like the tutoring I did before,
Mm.
which had been in person. Now I was like, I found, got a connection who worked with like an online homeschool program where they have courses that homeschoolers could take. So I started doing that and teaching math online. And then actually we started like a family farm business on the acreage that we had purchased. So really, again, another entrepreneurial venture there that to see how we could make stuff like that work.
Yeah, and I said it in the intro, and I misspoke slightly, which was you didn't start real estate investing from your basement or in your basement as if you had an office in your basement. You rented out your basement, which
Hmm.
may be a new concept for some of the listeners, right? This whole idea of wait a minute, you still lived in the house and you rented out a room effectively as a way to make
Hmm.
additional income from the house, from the asset, from the home that you own. Because you had a big, like you said, it was sort of a dream home, big 5 bedroom. You weren't using all the bedrooms. Hey, let's rent out the basement. Can you talk a bit about that in terms of like, was your husband on board? What did it take in order to pull that off? Because now you got someone else living in your home with you, right?
Right. And yes, and like you said in the intro, I don't have anybody in my family who does real estate investing. And they are very, again, mindset in the box, W-2 employed. Like this was like all the what ifs, right? That's
Yeah.
what people who are in the box are always like, well, what if? What if it's an axe murderer? What if
I was
it's,
going to say, I always
somebody
go
who
to the
plays
worst
loud music
extreme,
at
right?
2 a.m., right? Yes, exactly. And so I felt all that. And so if you're somebody listening and you're like feeling that and all those what ifs, like I get that. And what helped again is, like I said, I love to have somebody who's just a few steps ahead. And what really made it seem doable was that my husband is an engineer by training, worked in engineering at the time, and he had some coworkers, some very in the box, intellectual
Engineering.
engineers,
Mm,
yes, people, and they had done some rentals where they had he had a few coworkers who had really what they'd done is kept their old houses when they had bought a new one
mm,
and they had rented it out and self-managed it, very I think traditional real estate investing style. They just keep their old house, rent it out when they move on, get someone in there, and that's how it worked. And so seeing that they'd had success, seeing that it wasn't every horror story
mm.
about having to evict people or trashed houses or things like that and being like, you know these people had an okay experience. We can give it a try. That helped a lot.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that helped a lot is realizing we can just take that next step and that next step and see how it goes. And at a lot of places here, you can stop if it doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
So I could prep that lease, right? I could get that job listing up, which at the time, Craigslist was the place that you put rental listings up.
Yeah.
Not so much anymore, I don't think, but I could put that rental listing up on Craigslist. We could have people come by and tour it. And there's no saying that just because they applied, I had to rent to them, right? And so I could see, hey, do we find somebody where it works? And then that first lease, I mean, we did a year-long lease. And so it's like after that year, we can decide if we wanted to keep going or not, right? So it wasn't like right now I had to commit. And I feel like this is what can scare people. I know you feel like if I'm going to start on this, I feel like I need to say this is what's going to be for a decade. This is going to control the whole rest of my life instead of just realizing there are multiple places where you can either pivot or stop.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And and what's again so interesting to think about your husband engineering. So he's probably likely a framework, step by step kind of rule. I would say, and you correct me,
Hmm.
rule follower. Like, hey, this is the way we do it. Let's do it the tried and true way. Let's step it out. To be confident, to be willing to step into something unknown, and yet perhaps lean on your strengths, which is let's set up a framework, an SOP, a process, and then let's start stepping it out, right? And see, how far down this list we get. And like you said, if we want to stop, we can stop. If we want to pivot, if we get to a sticking point, maybe we figure out a different solution and keep going. But it's the will. It's maybe the willingness to, or the ability to say, let's set up a framework and let's start moving through it, right? And getting toward
Hmm.
that, whatever that goal is. And for you, it was, if I'm going to think about renting out my basement, what do I have to do first? Well, I need a lease. Maybe I need someone, a lawyer, to oversee it. I need to, whatever it is, right? As you start to step through those gates.
Hmm.
Um, so talk about that then. Once you get your basement rented, and then you start seeing how that's going. Where does your real estate kind of life start to take you?
Right. Well, once we started renting out the basement, I realized, oh my goodness, this is the easiest money that I am making, right? Rather than having to go to that public school and teach those kids or have to go, do this extra tutoring afterward or anything like that. It's just a check that comes at the beginning of every month. And for us, when you're renting out a part of your house, and so like what we did is we had a door to the basement. We put in a kitchen down there, or like a kitchenette. So everything was self-contained other than they came up to do laundry like once a week, right? That was it. And so it was just like, this really isn't impacting me negatively, and this is
Mhm.
great money. And that, it was like so when you're renting out a part of your house, a lot of people get started this way because it's pretty much pure profit, right? I didn't have to buy a place.
Yeah.
Maybe my utilities, maybe my electric went up a little bit, but honestly, in this house, it was all electric and we had a well. So it wasn't like water or anything. It was like, I think we maybe boosted our, internet plan a little bit and maybe our electric went up a little bit, but that was it. So it's pretty much like pure profit that is coming in, which was exciting. And I realized, well, I don't have more basements to rent, but this real estate investing thing really has something to it. And so that's when my husband and I, and along that way, of course, with that income, and like I said, teaching online, I was able to quit working at the public school, at the end of one of the school years. And then it was, well, maybe we could save up and buy more rental properties, right? Like after a year or so, it's like, this is going well. We know how to do it. We are experienced now with, hiring tenants, with having a lease, with handling like the little bumps that come up, right? So we ended up saving up and starting to buy investment properties locally. Now, I would love to say that I like did a ton of research or anything like that, but honestly, I was just kind of still following the the path that I had seen from these coworkers of my husband, right? That they self-managed and we lived in Northern Virginia where rents relative to purchase price, there's not the best ratio. And
Mm.
so, and we were at a place where this needed to be in the black, right? It didn't need to bring like this huge, what, people in real estate measure of like cash on cash return or things like that. It just, I didn't even know any of those. It was just like, it needs to cover its own expenses and make us a
Right.
little bit of money. And then it's going to appreciate, the tenants are going to pay down the mortgage and that's
Yeah.
going to increase our net worth. That was how I thought of it. And so we ended up it took a lot of time because we honestly, again, Northern Virginia, a lot of things just didn't pencil out. But we ended up finding this niche of buying these condos in the city that we lived outside of, which was Leesburg, Virginia. And these condos were pretty affordable because, in general, condos tend to cost less than like a townhouse or a single family home of comparable bedrooms and bathrooms. I didn't have crazy condo fees, which is something people worry about. These were older buildings. And so they had amenities. They had a pool, they had playgrounds, things like that. But their condo fees were like in the 300s per month, which, isn't 700 or 1,000 a month like some of them can be. And so the numbers penciled out. They would rent for a pretty good amount. We started with a two-bedroom, ended up with three-bedroom units and bed heads and beds and that's what people kind of care about. That's what dictates the rent. And so got one, it worked out well, and then it ended up eventually with a portfolio of several condos locally that we were self-managing. And that was when you spoke about in the intro, it was still like trading hours for dollars. This was
Mm.
something that it did give me time freedom to a big extent. It did give me location freedom, right? A lot of real estate investing, there's certain times you need to be present, like showing a unit or dealing with a turnover or, responding to a tenant because these are all long-term rentals. But it was pretty flexible. And so it was meeting a lot of my goals. And yet I realized eventually that when I got my first long-term, or excuse me, long distance rental, we ended up buying a long distance short-term rental in Myrtle Beach. And I was like, oh no, no, no. That was where I kind of got knocked back on my butt, I would say, because I realized I've been doing this all myself and that's worked while it's local, while it's, I think we had maybe 5 doors. And yet that's not going to scale to more doors and it's not going to scale long distance. And that's where I started to be like, I need to run this like a business. I need to get systems. I need to leverage other people. And so that first long distance short-term rental kind of again knocked me down because I didn't, and yet that led to a great growth opportunity as well.
Yeah. I know this is part of your story was that first rental in Myrtle Beach, which caught you by surprise, right? You were there on a trip and decided to, I can't remember the circumstance, but you decided to look at local real estate and you were surprised that, oh, this isn't as expensive. It's a beach town. I would have figured the property's super expensive, but it's not as expensive as I thought. Let me check rents. And oh, rents are higher than I would have thought. And so these pencil out really nicely. Rents are high. I can buy it at a lower price. So the mortgage is not that as much. And it's lucrative. At the same time, it's far away. You got to trust house cleaners and different people, and renters change out. You got to have maintenance done, things like that. And so now all of a sudden you're having to figure out the systems that you talked about, but you almost sort of stumbled into it. But it was that willingness, I think, to put yourself out there and look and consider like what's possible here. I'm just not going to write it off like, oh, I can't ever do that. You considered what's possible and found a little niche, right, that you were able to then start to get into, right?
Mhm.
But it required a different
Exactly.
mindset around, I can't just do it myself because I'm not all my backyard in Northern Virginia. It's now far away. And so I can't just get in the car and go and check on the house or do the cleaning or do the maintenance or oversee what the maintenance person is telling me needs to be fixed so that I can be sure it's right. I've got to trust and have some processes in place, which then allows you to start building a whole new aspect of your business.
hmm Exactly. And that's where so often I think both for real estate investors and for, solopreneurs and early entrepreneurs is you're playing a game where you can do it all yourself, right? You've set up a system where you can do it all yourself, right? A lot of real estate investors, they start locally where I remember once for a turnover, like going and with a friend that I paid repainting this condo, right? And now that me now is like, what? There's no way that was the best use of my time, right?
Yeah.
But that's where I was at the time. And so, but I was able, the great thing about that long distance rental was to put myself where I could not do it. And I feel like that's what a lot of
Mm.
entrepreneurs need to do is almost realize, hey, in order to better my systems, in order to make this really scalable, right? Make it not just depend on me trading hours for dollars. They need to almost make a system or a setup where they can't
Mm.
do it themselves so that they're forced to instead rely on systems or leverage or these things that are really going to be putting the key pieces in place for it to be a real scalable business.
Yeah, and force yourself to figure it out, right? If you have to figure it out, you've got the better likelihood of figuring it out, right? So there's a
hmm
good friend of mine, and I've quoted this before, but on the show, it's this idea that in order to discover new oceans, you must consent to lose sight of the shore, right? And
hmm
so there's power in that because you can do all the stuff, get the boat ready, you can go out on a little voyage, but as long as you still have the shore in sight behind you, you know you can go back. But in
Right.
order really to discover something new, you've got to be comfortable with, I'm going to lose sight of the comfort that's behind me, the known quantity that's
hmm
behind me. At the same time, and I love that quote, it's powerful for me personally, but as I've gone through my own entrepreneurial journey, it's what I've discovered is the further away from the shore. And now once you lose sight of the shore, it actually becomes easier because now there's no looking back. You're not sort of caught in between. You're not looking forward, not looking backward. You're only looking to the next horizon, to the place, to the ocean you're trying to discover. And so you can really dedicate more to it, which lends back to what you're saying there is if you force yourself, put yourself in a situation where you really can't rely on what's worked for you so far, which is doing it all yourself, and you put yourself in a boat of, I've got to figure this out in a new way, the inspiration will come from that requirement, right?
hmm
There's a phrase about that, and I'm drawing a blank on it around something is the uh, inspiration is the, I can't think of it now. It's
And
something about, You know what I'm saying? It's
There's necessity is the mother of invention.
There you
That's one of
go.
the
That's
things
it.
this
That's it
reminds me of.
exactly.
Yes.
So yeah, put yourself in that situation where you've got to figure it out, and you will, right? You'll figure it out, or you'll figure out
Mhm.
maybe a C grade solution, but that will lead you to then a B grade, which will then become an A. It may not be an A out of the gate, but it will get you a step closer to it, to where it becomes an A as you go. So talk about that learning curve, right? As you start to now leverage systems and new processes in order to pull this off.
Right. And learning curve is a great, I think, term to use for that. And that's something that's important when people do get started with this kind of stuff. I think, like everything in general, is realizing it's not necessarily going to be perfect the first time. Like, odds are it won't, right? It will not be perfect the first time. And going in with that expectation is going to make it so much easier to pick yourself up and dust yourself off when something does go awry, let's
Yeah.
say. And so, like, with that first beach rental, to give you an idea, like you did a great summary of it. We've been down in Myrtle Beach on a trip, and just had a pre-approval in hand from a multiple offer situation where we had lost up in Northern Virginia, and ended up with this short-term rental because the numbers worked and it seemed like a great investment. So that was, I think, maybe June or July that we were down there for that. And so then, and of course, summer is the peak time in Myrtle Beach. And so we closed remotely, and then we plan on coming back in September after that busy season, after the high season, and come in. We're going to stay at the house. We're going to be there for a week. We're going to meet with our cleaners. We're going to get everything set up, right? And so we'd only really been in the house for that initial like tour that you do before you make an offer. That was the only
Yeah.
time we'd been in the house, maybe 45 minutes, right? And so then we go down there, and at this point I had two kids and I was pregnant with our third, and we're down there for a week, and we realized that the house needed more than we had originally planned, right? Like, it needed to be repainted. All of the linens were worn out and needed to be replaced, right? There was a lot of little odds and ends. Like, surface, the place wasn't that old. The bones were all great. I want to like acknowledge that. And yet, when you kind of look underneath the surface, it needed a lot more of a refresh than we had realized. And the cleaner that we had was awful. He needed to be fired.
Yeah.
Was
Yeah.
is the short way to say it. And so that's where we had to go down there. And this job that was supposed to be like mostly vacation and a little bit of fixing up became, oh no, no, no. This is a lot of fixing up. And this is finding, and I had planned to interview a couple cleaners just to see, get some backups or whatever. But it became oh no, we need to replace this guy like urgently. And so, yes, that was a situation where it's like there is a learning curve. But you know what? I couldn't just kind of like, to your last point, I think this is a great example of, couldn't just be like, okay, it's not like something you bought at the store, when you buy an investment property, you can't just be like, no, I'm gonna go return this. Like,
Yeah.
this is more work than I thought, right? Like, you get a puzzle and you like take it home and it's like, oh, this is 1,000 piece instead of 100. No, 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 I'm gonna go return it. No, you're like, oh well, now I've got this and I'm just gonna make
Figure
it
it out.
work. Like,
Yeah.
this is gonna figure it out. And I will say that's where my personality does well with that. I'm like, hey, if this is what we committed to, there has to be a way. There has to be a way, and we're gonna figure it out, and
Yeah.
we're gonna make it work. And so, it was, and some people might not think it's worth it, but I was just thinking, we're down there, it's September, it's hot. I'm like very pregnant with our third kid, and I
Oh,
was like, this is not fun, but it was like, hey, this is the path we're supposed to be on. There's a reward at the end. There's a light at the end of the tunnel of having this property that's going to be very profitable, that's going to give us our own place to use for our own personal enjoyment as a family and everything. And so, yes, it was a learning curve and it was a challenge. And so I think for people going in with that expectation of things aren't going to be perfect, and yet, if this is the right thing to do, we've got to keep going. So I can't suddenly decide, oh, I'm going to be the cleaner because that cleaner isn't good, right? No, I'm going to say, we're going to find a different cleaner who's going to come in, right? And so you don't want to take those jobs back. You don't want to get
mhm.
smaller again. You want to realize, hey, it's not going to go perfectly every time. We're going to learn, we're going to grow. And so I did end up with finding a new cleaner while we were there. Honestly, it was somebody who was cleaning the unit next to ours, and just kind of went in, talked to them, saw how good that looked, hired them, right? They were also able to paint the unit and do some other of the work that needed to be done. Myrtle Beach does have plenty of stores. It's a huge metropolitan area. We were able to restock all of the worn out stuff or the missing stuff. We were able to get it in pretty good shape in that 1 week. So it was doable. Did I work a little more than I was anticipating that week? Yes. Did I also survive that? Yes. And
Yeah.
so it ended up working out.
Right on. Very good. Okay. So now as the real estate is growing and so you're adding some doors, talk about the progression there. Cause I know you start to, I think you mentioned at this point, are you up to, did you say about eight or so doors or five? You were five maybe, or
It was probably around half a dozen at this point.
yeah.
And this takes us up to fall of 2019. That's when, that September is when we visited that Myrtle Beach house and kind of fixed it up. And of course, what happened spring 2020, COVID. And at the same time, in March, as everything's shutting down, is when I also had our third child. So, and
Oh, wow.
the other thing I guess along this way is part of my real estate investing journey was I became a real estate agent because I felt like and again, there wasn't some huge plan here. It was we missed out on a deal and we think that the agent we were working with was a part of that, right? That
Mm,
just their hustle or their opportunities or things like that, that it was possible with a different agent that wouldn't have happened, right?
yeah.
And so it was like, well, there's some tax benefits, there's real estate professional status, there's being in it more, right? Like I could follow the market, I could have access to the MLS. I was like, okay, why don't I get my real estate license along the way? I didn't realize everything that that would entail, right? I think I'm like, oh, this is a great idea because I know about 10 to 20% of what this does. And I jump in and then I'm like, oh, this is the other 80, 90% that this is going to be. But, it all ends up, it's the path I'm supposed to be on. It's what I'm feeling pulled to, and it ends up working out. So in 2018, I had become a real estate agent. So spring 2020, the reason I mentioned it is because, I was actively working as an agent. I had clients, I was helping people buy and sell homes. I was having our third child, and I was working on my real estate investing. And, we had this new short-term rental. Well, Myrtle Beach for the entire month of April of 2020 pretty much shut down short-term rental. So our normal like spring break season, it was shut down. Like
Mm,
it was illegal to take tenants because they didn't want, people couldn't go to work. They didn't want everybody flooding and just being like, well, I'm going to go spend quarantine
yeah.
at the beach, and flooding down there and getting sick and overwhelming the hospitals was Myrtle Beach's concern. And so, unless you were renting to like a nurse or
Yeah.
someone or medical professional, you really couldn't rent. So that was the good thing about, or I guess where we were in a good position is that we were never too leveraged and we had a diversified portfolio.
Mm,
So not being able to rent that house for a month in April wasn't like a super financial stressor, right? My husband was working as an engineer. We had these other short or long-term rentals in our local area. Like financially it was fine, but it was just, the world was in chaos then.
yes.
Um,
And it could have been
so
a
the next,
disaster, right? I mean, it could have been like,
yes.
wait a minute, I have a, X thousand dollar mortgage to make, and I have now no rental income that I was counting on it being three, four, five X of my mortgage because short-term rentals typically they're lucrative or they can be. And that goes
Mhm.
to zero. You think, oh, it's never going to go to zero. I might not get 100% of what I think I'm going to get, but it's not going to be zero. And yet here we are, bam, and you're faced with zero. So like, again, good that you had the other sources of income and cash flow, and your leverage wasn't so high that it wasn't like, oh my gosh, we're in a mess here. But it still had to be fairly
Right.
stressful because it was such an unknown time too. It's like, is this going to be 2 weeks? Is it going to be a month? Is it 6 months? And it seemed to kind of, my recollection is, and obviously don't know what beach real estate was like in Myrtle Beach or when they opened back up, but knowing kind of what some things were going on in New Mexico and we had some mountain property at one point, that it was bad. Like it was, things were locked down for a while. And so you were able to weather that without too much damage. Did you have a moment there where you thought we need to dump this house or sell it or get out from under it? Or was it just like, nah, we'll weather through it?
The nice thing is it was such a reasonable purchase in the scheme of things. I mean, this was like a two-bedroom, two-bath place that I want to say we paid around 180,000 for. So
Okay.
like that's why Myrtle Beach was like such a good deal. It really wasn't a
Yeah.
super stressing thing. And the nice thing is that it's in South Carolina, which is a very like owners' rights, free market
Mm.
state. And so really, other than that month of April, we were able, beginning of May, we actually went down at the beginning of May and did a week at the beach house. And
Yeah.
then it was packed for the summer because again, people, they were working remotely. They
Yeah.
didn't want to stay in their homes. And so we had an amazing year overall in 2020 because
Yeah.
the rentals did so well. And in 2021, because people they weren't flying,
Yeah.
they still wanted to get out of their house. So it ended up being really great for us. It ended up being definitely a win overall. So that was 2020. We had these, I was working as an agent. We had all this, the short-term rental. We were still like figuring out the new systems, figuring out all of that. And then with COVID and everything, my husband and I had moved to Northern Virginia in 2011. So it had been 9 years. And we realized this isn't where we want to continue going, right? It's like so often, and I think part of my story that we've kind of talked about here, Eric, is like you start with something and it's good for you at the time. And yet if you're growing and evolving, that might start to be a mismatch, right?
Yeah.
You might start to evolve into something else, and that's okay. And that's where we were and had kind of evolved to where, Northern Virginia and this house on acreage wasn't where we wanted to be in our future.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of like, and the great thing is because I've always kind of wanted time freedom, location freedom, and we'd done this real estate investing, we had created a life where we had the opportunity, which, I don't take for granted. So many people, they are like, I have to be in this town. Like
Mm.
I cannot move to another town. I can't move to another county. I mean, maybe if I wanted a long commute, but to another state or another region of the country, like most people don't have that freedom to do that.
Yeah.
And we did because of what we had created with real estate investing and with these opportunities. And so that's what we did. Effectively, that's what we did. Now, COVID also helped because with my husband's job and he was able to go in and say, "Hey, I'm going to work remote. I'm going to do projects that I can do remotely." And they had that, and he was able to do that. But we also had enough financial cushion where if they had said no, we could have been like, okay, we're going to go do it anyway. And he could have found another job, right? We had that flexibility that, again, I don't take for granted. And
Mhm.
so we ended up moving to Chattanooga, Tennessee. I honestly, we visited September of 2020. We'd gone to Myrtle Beach and we swung through Chattanooga on the way back. Other than that, I had done a day trip there when I lived in Atlanta. Oh no, and my husband and I had driven through Chattanooga when we had moved to Northern Virginia and stopped to see a cousin of mine for lunch. We had really little experience in Chattanooga, Tennessee,
Yeah.
but it was we knew the size of city we wanted. My characterization of that is I wanted a city with a minor league baseball team because it's big enough to have stuff to do,
Yeah.
and yet it's small enough that it doesn't take a ton of time and traffic to get there.
Yeah.
And Chattanooga does. They have the Chattanooga Lookouts, and it
Yeah.
was a great market for real estate investing. It was various reasons that drew us to it. So we visited, we went under contract, got a house, moved in fall of 2020, and that's where I started doing more real estate investing. I started as an agent there, focused exclusively on working with real estate investors. That was my niche, is I was
Mm.
like, I can help real estate investors invest in Chattanooga. I brought a virtual assistant on for that business and ended up doing so much business that I started a real estate agent team where other agents came and worked for me to help service all of these clients. And it was like I was running my own little business there of this real estate agent team within the larger Keller Williams brokerage that I was at. So there was a lot of development and opportunity and growth that came from our time in Chattanooga.
That's a major shift right there. What you just described is like a massive change, right? So now you go from
Yes.
I'm buying some property, I'm maintaining it to I'm running a team of real estate agents that are selling for me or they're selling and I'm part of that, they're part of my group. And now you truly are, not truly are because you've already been, but you're really stepping now more boldly into business owner as opposed
Hmm.
to solopreneur or kind of making it work on your own. You're really now kind of way out there doing the business
Hmm.
thing, which
It was a big step up for sure.
yeah, yeah. And so you mentioned the VA and having some assistance and things like that. And I know part of your story is you really go deep into the virtual assistant world, right? And so I don't know if it's
Hmm.
time to kind of start talking about that, but talk a little bit about how the evolution, because what I'm, the story that I'm hearing would seem to be one that I've heard before that would say, man, my goal is just to keep adding doors, keep building this bigger and bigger real estate empire, and lean really heavily into I've now become this new person that's all about real estate, and yet you almost don't, right? You almost sort of you start to do other things, right? You speaking,
Right.
coaching, and then the virtual assistant business. So I don't know if it's time yet to talk about that, if the real estate story continues to grow and evolve still.
Hmm. I think I think it's a great time to talk about virtual assistants because that was really what helped me, I think, 10x and level up that business. And
Yeah.
I think that a lot of your listeners could value from hearing that. So, you know, when I got started making systems and leverage with my investment properties with my short-term rental, that leverage was really like, in terms of people, it was the cleaner, right? It was the handyman. It was the HVAC company. It was that local team in Myrtle Beach. It wasn't somebody taking on like the management or things off of my plate in terms of running the business. But when I started my like being a real estate agent in Chattanooga, I had gone from a market in Northern Virginia with a price point of about like $500,000 on average to Chattanooga had a price point about half that. And so I was like, if I want to make the same amount of money, I have to do twice as many deals. And if I want to make more money, then I have to do more deals. And so realizing that, I was just like, and again, it's putting yourself in a position where like you can't do it all, right? So you
Right.
have to run it like a business. And I was like, I cannot do every single step of a real estate transaction, do it well, do all the marketing that I need to do, and do the number of deals that I want to do. And so it was just a math equation of that point of, well, I need someone else to do some of these hours. And as part of that math equation, while I'm restarting my real estate agent business here, I like things to be self-sufficient, right? Like with my investment properties, I don't want to like finance an assistant for my real estate agent business from other income sources. And so it's like, how am I going to do this in a cost-effective manner? And it was like, well, virtual assistant. That's the choice, right? They can be really cost effective and I can get those hours at a great deal for somebody who can handle all that admin work, all the back end work of being a real estate agent. And so that's what February of 2021, after I had like my first deal closed, I brought on a full-time virtual assistant. And it was scary again, kind of like we've talked about a lot. It was like, well, I kind of have this like Google Sheet checklist of what I do when I go like contract to close. And so because I have these steps, like someone else can do them, right? I can like make a video of when I do them and then they can watch that video, they can write a procedure and they can start doing it. That was the extent of the plan and the system I had in place. And that's what I did. And it worked. And the thing is, that is still what I recommend to people in terms of getting started with virtual assistants. Although I will note with AI, it is even easier because now you can take that video and you don't need a real human to write that procedure. You can take that video, you can have AI write a transcript of it. You can put that transcript into ChatGPT and you can get a draft of the procedure right there without a virtual assistant even being involved. But I would say take that and then have your virtual assistant fine tune it, right? Have them watch the video, have them, format the procedure and make it beautiful, make it, put in some screenshots and
Mm.
make it something where somebody who can go from no experience and follow that procedure and be pretty successful in executing that task. And so that's kind of how I got started. And it wasn't perfect, right? Sometimes they make mistakes. Sometimes there's something that's not in the procedure, but you start with tasks that there's a little wiggle room, right? Where it's not like something blows up if the wrong word is used or something like that, where everything is, fixable.
Yeah.
And it was great. And that's how like 6 months of having that virtual assistant allowed me to do so much marketing, to do so much front end client work, to do the important stuff like touring those houses for clients that I was able to still be, even with a full-time virtual assistant, like working from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. And that's when I went into my brokerage and I was like, guys, I need to start a team because I need other agents to help with all these clients.
Yeah. 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 That's awesome. And so, is your husband at this point, is he still working his engineering job, or is he fully into the business with you at this point yet?
He is continuing to work his engineering job. We never really wanted him to come into like my real estate agent business because, oh, again, diversity. Real
Diversity.
estate
Yeah.
agent business, like real estate agenting, depends on a lot of other factors. I mean, we've really seen, I think, since fall 20 or 2022, 2023 when the market, interest rates started rising and the real estate market, kind of took a
Got
step
tough.
back in terms of volume and
Yeah.
everything. I was always worried about something like that happen. So I never wanted him to come into the real estate agent world.
Yeah.
And he was happy as an engineer until
Yeah.
he wasn't, right?
Yeah.
But he saw, you know, he would see on like Chattanooga business owner pages and stuff, he'd be like, all these people are looking for help. And they're offering so much money for this help, and they can't fill these positions, right? Because, post COVID, hiring was really tough in the United States, right?
Yeah.
People got a lot of money given to them, and they then weren't as incentivized to work. And he would see all these listings and he'd be like, people could hire a virtual assistant for a fraction of this and they'll show up and work, right? And the thing is, the business owners in Chattanooga didn't even know about virtual assistants. So my husband had this idea of starting this virtual staffing business, right? Because there is a lot of knowledge that goes into hiring a virtual assistant well. Like the success rate for people who just say, I'm going to go hire a virtual assistant isn't that high, right?
Yeah.
Because managing and hiring someone is tough anyway, right? That's challenging. There's a lot that goes into it. How are you going to do that well? How are you going to lead someone? And then you put the person on the other side of the world and have it all be remote. And you've got to then figure out how to pay them in another currency in another country, like money transfer between countries. Like it works, but like that's a whole thing, right? You got to figure out how to manage them, how to make sure they're working, right? Um, all of that. And so he's like, what if I made a business that helped people do that? And it's still going to be so much less expensive to get the same quality of someone in the United States, but I'm going to create everything to help them succeed. And so that's what he did. He did that kind of in his pockets of free time around his W-2 until it was successful enough that then he could quit his W-2 and focus on the virtual staffing business full time. And so now that's his primary focus now to this day. It's been over 3 years now that we've had this business. And so we've seen what works, what doesn't. And he kind of focuses on that, helping these entrepreneurs, business owners get those virtual assistants. And I focus on our portfolio. Right now, we've got a virtual assistant who works 40 hours a week helping manage that portfolio. Of course, we've got another one who does the accounting and bookkeeping for it. And then I also work with other investors to help them do the same thing to their portfolio with running it like a business, getting SOPs in place. I have a course for because investors, they don't want to hire like a virtual staffing business. They want to like, do it on a shoestring. So I have like an online course for them to learn
Yeah.
how to hire a virtual assistant because we really just want it's comes back to why I became a teacher, right? It's that impact, helping other people live their best lives and be their best selves. And so I've been able to do a lot of that for my own life through my real estate investing, running it like a business, having these systems, having this virtual team in place. So now it's kind of my mission to help others do the same because it can create transformational wealth, which really can transform your life.
Right on. Love that. Okay. And so now your husband's running the staffing or the virtual assistant business that's growing. You've got the real estate business. You're doing some coaching and helping other real estate investors learn to do what you do. At what point do you look up and say, maybe we don't live in Chattanooga anymore. Maybe we start to think about leaving the shores of the United States and exploring the world a bit?
Great question. Well, in 2023, so it's kind of funny. I went to a big conference for my brokerage in August of 2023. And it's supposed to be like, hey, here's where you come, you learn new strategies, you go back, you implement it in your business. And I walked away from that and I was like, I want to sell my real estate team. It's not like I want to go back and put things into it. It was like, kind of like we talked about,
Wow.
you evolve, you move on. And it was like, I'd had it for about 2 years now. I felt like I had done a lot. I'd put the systems in place. I'd put the virtual team in place. And it was like, the challenges that the team was facing, it was like I, I don't know that those are, I mean, they're challenges 2 years in. I don't know that they are challenges my strengths play to, right?
Mm.
I was like, I think this is the time for someone else to come in with their unique vision and experience and talents. I've put my best work into this team. Let's let someone else come in and add to what I created. And so that's what I decided to do. Now, selling a real estate team is not super common. It's not something that you hear or know a lot of people who did and so who've done that. So I decided though, and I was like, hey, this could be something that could be scary. It could be something that I would back down to. It could be something that I say, I'm going to try to do this. Um, we have a rule in my family. We don't try.
Yeah.
So I was like, I can't do that, right? If I'm going to say I'm going to sell my real estate team, if that feels like the next right step, then I'm going to be 100% committed to that with my actions, with my words, with my mindset. And so that's what I did. And I told like a few trusted people and said, who do you know who could help with this? You know, who do I need to talk to? What resources do you have? And that led to just the right doors being opened, right? Getting connected to somebody who focuses on valuing real estate brokerages and teams, right? Uh, those kinds of things. And so that's where fall of 2023, I sold my real estate agent team. That was the last thing that required us being in person,
Mm,
because leading those agents and being in the office, and that required some physical presence in
sure.
Chattanooga. And as I was working through that process of selling that team, my husband and I have monthly like family finance meetings, like where we sit down, we look at our finances, we check in, we kind of like make our forward plan. And we realized in one of those in September 2023, I wasn't under contract on the team. I didn't have a buyer lined up, but he was like, once we sell this team, we could go travel the world like we've always kind of planned on doing later. We could do it now. And why wait? And so
Mm,
that's what we decided to do. So I sold the team end of October, signed the paperwork, and then end of February, it was like, we're out. So we like cleaned out our house, got all of our personal items we wanted to keep in storage, rented it as a furnished long-term rental, got a whole bunch of stuff that went to Goodwill or got
mm.
sold that we didn't necessarily need in our future. It was another evolution of us, and started planning our travels. So we did about a quarter, mostly domestic, plus, an international cruise. And then June of 2024 is we flew to Colombia, and we spent 3 months in Colombia. Then we spent about a little under 4 months in Mexico, popped back in the US for Christmas in Hawaii, and then went
Wow,
over to
nice.
Asia
Yeah.
right after Hawaii, and we're still in Asia, and we're just got continued travel and plans.
Incredible, right? So, talk a little bit about Colombia, because I know offline you were saying that it's been, I think, your favorite stop so far, and I think from a
Right.
U.S. perspective, it's easy to get these like misconstrue or get a distorted vision of what it might what it might be like to live in South America, right? So you think, oh my gosh, Colombia, I think drug trade, cartels, it's
Right.
not the US, so the laws are different. I'm gonna end up in jail, but your experience was far different, right? You're like, it was
Right.
awesome. So talk a little bit about
Right.
Colombia.
Well, and I would say the funny thing that I have seen as we've gone through these places is a lot of times the places that we kind of choose on a whim versus the places that we evaluate a little bit more rigorously, the places we choose on a whim have been like home runs every time.
Interesting.
And so, and I think I see that in my life story, and it's tough because I'm a planner. I'm a planner, I'm an evaluator, I'm a like a, pluses and minuses list person, and
Yeah.
yet I don't know that it's made a huge difference when I look back practically.
Mm,
So we chose Colombia as our first place because, Spanish is easier language than some others, right? It's the same alphabet. We can, I'm originally from California. I feel like I can muddle through with,
yeah.
I can understand signs, where the exit is, where the bathroom is, things like that. And so it's like, okay, Spanish speaking country is a great start. Plus, South America time zones are the same as the US. So that would be a huge advantage as we continue to run our businesses and everything. And I had read a book, honestly, about people who had taken a gap year and traveled, and they had started in Colombia and had some great experiences there. And so I was like, maybe we look at that. And so we kind of just, obviously we did a little more research than that, but
Yeah.
it was kind of like, yeah, I think it's going to work, right? Visas are easy, cost of living's good, it's supposed to be beautiful. And so we ended up doing that. And there's a point where I was worried. So we started in Cartagena, which is, well-known tourist destination. And then we were going to Medellin for about 6 weeks. And Medellin, you see a lot on the internet with all the bad things, right?
Yep.
Of course, it's got its history with Pablo Escobar and everything like that. And
Yep.
even more recently, you hear about people going there to party and bad things happen. I mean, I was like, you know what? we're not going there to party. We're going there with our family of five and
Right.
three kids, you know? And so it was like, we'll probably be just fine. And we were, it was actually great. I think Latin culture is so respectful of the family that we
Mhm.
found that rather than like, because you worry, I think in the US, you really like, okay, if I'm gonna be a mom with three kids, like if I was gonna like try and rob somebody, like that would be an easy target. They're gonna be distracted with kids or whatever. There was never anything like that I experienced in Latin America, in Colombia, or in Mexico. They were very respectful family, helpful if anything, if I
Mm.
was there with the kids. And so all the Colombian grandmas would walk by and not knowing whether or not we spoke Spanish, a potential language barrier was not an issue. They still were going to talk to us. They were still going to like say how cute our kids were and just be very warm and welcoming. So our time in Colombia was fabulous. Although I will say, now that we've spent a lot of time in Asia, we absolutely love, these various Asian cultures and countries
Mm.
that we have experienced as well.
Yeah, and my nephew just went to Japan maybe 6 months or so ago, and he was like, it was absolutely incredible. Can't wait to go back. And I had another good buddy of mine went to Japan on a 2 week vacation. He said, incredible, so clean, the city, people so kind, food incredible, all just raved about it. And so you've been there now for months, and is that similar experience just in terms of just really enjoying Japan?
Well, we started in the Philippines. We did a month in the Philippines. I've been to Japan for a few weeks now, but we did the Philippines, which the people are so nice. And what's interesting is even though like we've worked with Filipino VAs for years,
Yeah.
it's still different being in the Philippines. And like one of my takeaways is, dude, the women are the ones in charge in the Philippines. Like it was so interesting. And the things you don't know about beforehand, but going to the Philippines, like you go up, like we were checking into a hotel and they speak to me before they speak to my husband, right? Everywhere, like that would be the case. They'd speak to
Mm.
me, like the cab driver would speak to me before they'd speak to my husband. And so I've asked, some Filipinos about that, and it was like, well, one, the women are generally going to be maybe a little nicer than the men, so easier to talk to them
Mm.
first or approach them. And two, the women are often the decision makers in
Interesting.
the culture. And so at least
Right.
that's what I've been told. But there's little things like that that you kind of pick up on, I think, and cherish that I wouldn't have thought about or anticipated, but did a month in the Philippines and then 2 months in Vietnam, which was fabulous. And I really enjoyed our time there. Did just a week in Seoul, South Korea, kind of as like a vacation stop on the way to Japan, and loved Seoul. Like
Mm.
totally everyone in my family, all five of us are like, when do we get to go back to Korea? It's been very
Wow.
cool to, see the kids. I mean, so my kids are 9, 7, and 5, and they're like, love that. And then we've been in Japan here for a few weeks, and it has also been a win. So, across the board, every Asian country, of course, is going to be different, and there's different things we appreciate about it. And yet, all of them have definitely, I think, found their way into our hearts.
Man, what an incredible upbringing for your children too, to get to experience all these cultures, languages, the confidence you think that that would give them in terms of like,
Hmm.
I can go into a country where I don't speak the language that well or at all, can't read the signs that well or at all, and yet I've done it before that I know I can do it again in terms of like
Hmm.
figuring it out, adapting. Next country, no problem, we'll figure it out, we'll adapt, and how that can lead to I can figure lots of stuff out, right? Lots of different challenges, the confidence and just the experience, such a unique thing for kids to have at a young age that they'll take with them, forever.
Yes, that was, one of the things that I see, I know, like me, Eric, you're in masterminds, and I see, and it was funny, I went in October, I went back to a retreat for a mastermind, and one of the things that struck me is how some of these women in this mastermind, now a lot are older, they've got children who are older, and they may have had great business success, and yet they often have regret regarding their families and their
Mm.
children, right? They often feel like their children aren't living the lives they would have wanted for them, right? Aren't choosing the path that they would have wanted for them. And I can confident, when I was in that retreat, which we left, we're traveling full time. I had gone back to the US to do this retreat. And it was like, I'm pretty comfortable that I am shaping my children into their best selves because they're with us all the time.
Yeah.
I'm homeschooling them now. Like I'm giving them this education and I'm pouring into them. Like I said, we have these phrases of like, we don't say try in our family. We don't say can't in our family, right? Things like that we do. We talk about highs and lows. And so it's like the international experience is going to be huge and pivotal. And really, I think, like you said, give them confidence and security of what they can handle, right? Because they will have experienced so much. And with that is also that I get to spend so much time with them and lead by example, and they get to see me deal in these situations and me
Mm.
deal with being a business owner and an entrepreneur and an investor and everything like that. So kind of planting all those little seeds that will hopefully grow into them being really successful and well-rounded and confident adults.
Man, it's awesome. Where do you see yourself taking your business, Adrienne, in terms of like, the real estate side, the virtual assistant side, and just, you've done such a beautiful job of continuing to evolve. I think if there's a theme that's going to come out of for the title of this podcast, it's going to be around evolution and continuing to grow and just transform into the next version of yourself. What I also love about that concept is you never expressed any regret. It was never, from what you've shared, it was never like a moment of like, oh, I've reached a dead end. So I went down the wrong road and now I've got to figure out a new road. It was just, no, I'm evolving into the next version of me. The things that I've learned to this point that I don't want to keep going on this path, but I don't regret the path I've been on. I'm using it as a place to now pivot and evolve. And that's natural and good. And it's the actual plan, right? Is just to keep evolving. So I
Mhm.
love that just the beauty that you bring to that whole notion. Where do you see yourself kind of evolving, or correct me if you feel like I've misstated that?
No, no, I think that's spot on. Now, I will acknowledge that there is pain in the evolution, and yet
Yes.
I don't ever have regret. I think as long as for me, if I can get the lesson from that experience and move on, um, I don't regret. Yeah, we really don't. I remember actually being in a discussion and like the prompt was something about regret, and it was like, I don't do regret. That's
No.
not that's not a thing I do. So and that helps. That helps with being an evolver, I think. But the next evolution, in the virtual staffing business, we always as I think you can understand, for my husband being a computer engineer background and my background, we're always looking at the data and like, okay, who's having the most success? So one of the
Mm.
evolutions we've just done this year is really seeing that people who already work with someone else have the most success with a virtual assistant. Whether that's a partner or a team or a business that already has some employees, whether they're virtual or in person, they have a lot more success than the solopreneur does. For better or for worse. I was able to start as a solopreneur, but like that's just statistically less successful. So we've pivoted the virtual staffing business to focus on reaching those people who already understand the power of leverage with a person, right? Who already have someone else in there. That's who we're speaking to. Like maybe you want an executive assistant for your C-suite team. Maybe you want an executive assistant for your top salesperson, right? And kind of speaking to those people who already have someone else, who already have a team rather than a solopreneur, because
Mm.
they're having more success. They stay on as longer clients and they're able to really leverage this virtual assistant properly. So that's one of the evolutions there that we made on the investing business, for those listeners who are in the investing space, it can be tough to buy anything right now and have the numbers work, let's say.
Mm.
What's worked with the next, in addition to, buying investment properties and, investing in some passive stuff over the last few years, I also have been doing hard money lending for about 3 years, which again kind of just came up organically. But that's something where now I am scaling that up this year because it continues to do well. And it's really where, when I look at what I can do with my funds and what kind of return I can get right now, it's the one that makes the most sense. So, for my real estate investing side, I am scaling up this hard money lending. I'm going to start reselling notes. So, pretty much like letting other people invest in the loans that I do. So, that's the next evolution on that side as well.
Yep. And just for the listeners, just high level, hard money lending is basically you're acting like the bank, right? Someone needs a
Mhm.
loan for not necessarily a long period of time and more of a shorter period of time, or can it be a longer period of time, where you're basically the bank for them for the duration.
Mhm. Right. Yes. Typically our loans are 4 to 6 months. They can go up to
Yeah.
12 months long. And yes, someone's coming to us and they want to, let's say, flip a house, or they want to rehab a house, buy rehab and refinance and rent it out, keep it as a rental, right? Typically, it doesn't have to be a value add, and yet it often is. And so rather than kind of trying to get a bank loan on a house that needs work, which can be tough, right? Getting
Yeah.
an appraisal that matches the value, getting the money to do the renovation, all those things, as a hard money lender, they can come to us and say, hey, here's the deal, here's the house, here's what I'm going to pay for the house, here's what I'm going to pay for the renovation, here's what it's going to be worth after I do all of that work. Here's what I can bring to the deal, and we can effectively be the bank and loan on that. So that's what I have been doing. And so now kind of just looking to do more of that. And what's cool too, Eric, is that speaks to doing well while doing good that I've always enjoyed,
Mm.
because it's cool to see like, hey, this money that I have, this is helping like Joe, the house flipper, really change the life for his family, right? He's just an average guy in small town America who is trying to make a living for his family. So I'm able to help him. And he is taking these houses that are run down and not livable and making them into these nice houses that people can enjoy as well. So that's one of the other things I like about hard money lending is it's really helping like Main Street America,
Yeah.
and it's creating these houses for people to live when there is a housing shortage.
Fantastic. I love it. Last couple of questions just around, what are you excited about going forward as you look kind of down the road? What are the things that are kind of your top priorities and are getting you excited right now to get out and get after it?
Well, I'm always excited about our upcoming travel. Of course, we are going to spend a total of 2 months here in Japan, which is exciting. And then we're going to stop in Sri Lanka on the way to go spend the summer in the UK. So
Awesome.
that is super exciting. And just, we've had so many like bucket list experiences here already. I think my kids would say they're most excited to go to Universal Japan this week. I'm excited to do the safaris in Sri Lanka and kind of see elephants and all the cool animals that'll be there.
What awesome places you have chosen to travel to. It's not like you're just picking, we're going to spend a month in Spain or a month. It's like you're picking some really, I would just say from my perspective, different and unique places to go experience the world. So that's awesome.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Adrienne, where can people find you, keep up with your work and connect with you if they're interested in learning more about your businesses or how to work with you?
Definitely. So my website would be a great place. It's adriennegreen.com. I'm sure you'll put it in the show notes, ADRIENNEGREEN.com. Or on any social media, you can typically find me at A Real Green.
A Real Green. Okay, perfect. We'll get that definitely in the show notes. This has been such a great conversation, Adrienne. I appreciate you taking so much time out of what is a very early part of your day in Japan right now, 14 hours ahead of us. So very early before most people, I think, are typically moving around. So thank you for doing that and sharing your story so openly. I know our audience is going to love hearing it. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you, Eric.
To our audience, thank you so much for giving some of your time to us today and listening to the show. If you would write us a nice review, give us a rating, share the program with a friend, we'd be so appreciative, and I would be in your debt. Until next time, friends, I'm Eric Sardina. You've been listening to the Return to Authenticity podcast, and bye for now.